In this tutorial, we're going to look at how to stretch the psoas. We're going to do a quick piece on the whiteboard, then we're going to get down into the gym and have a quick look at how we then go about putting into practice what we've just looked at on the whiteboard. Before we get into that, if you quickly look underneath this video, you will see a link that goes straight through to my How to Correct Lordosis 12-week program. So if you have lordosis, you want to correct it, have a look at that program. It's a 12-week program, takes you through step by step. Also, not only is it just a workout program, there are plenty of workshops and tutorials in there to go about not only learning about lordosis, more about what I'm going to talk about on the whiteboard here, but also there are workshops to help you get the most from the stretches and also get the most from the exercises that you're doing, so you can work at those separately to perfect that technique, to perfect, as we're going to talk about here, why it's important to get certain techniques right when we come to correcting lordosis. So yes, please do just take a look at those, get enrolled, and you can get started today at correcting your lordosis. So before we get stuck into how we actually do it practically, first of all, we're just going to look at where is the psoas. So I'm just going to quickly, again, excuse my crude drawing, but we've got the pelvis and we've got the spine. Now, the psoas muscle, oh, and if I also just draw in the top of our legs as well. So the psoas is the muscle that comes off L5, L4, L3, L2, L1, T12, and you do get some fibres that go up into the diaphragm as well. So it comes off each of those. Now this will obviously be both sides. Then it comes down through the pelvis and joins on to the inside of the leg. Now again, this isn't the best drawing, but it will hopefully help you understand where the muscle is. So we're down, so this is where the muscle ends, and this is the point where it starts. So what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to lengthen this area here. Now, some people make a common mistake of excessively extending the hip. Now, what does that mean? Well, if I now draw, so this is obviously a front view, if I now draw a side view, so again, we've got the pelvis here, the spine will be at the back, and obviously the leg will come down here. So the muscle comes down through, joins on to the top of the leg here. So obviously here would be all the different vertebrae. So what most people do is they will go into a lot of extension to bring this bit down here, but all this can do, now this will be dependent on the person and it's not necessarily going to cause an injury, but what it will do is it will put pressure on the front part of the hip capsule, so where the leg joins into the pelvis, it will put pressure on the front because you're driving it forward, you're driving this joint forward into there with the extra extension when the thigh comes behind there. So what we're going to be looking at is a different way of doing it. And the important bit to remember now is that this muscle joins into T12 and some fibres go up into the diaphragm. So it goes further up into the spine. So what we're going to be looking at is extending this area instead of this area down here. So we're going to be looking to keep this slightly more vertical. So we're not putting as much pressure on, but then extending here so we can get the length from the muscle that we need. So how do we lengthen our psoas without putting excessive pressure on the front of the hip capsule? Well, it's very simple. We come down into this position. Now, depending on how tight your psoas is, will depend on how much we need to use here. Because it can be as simple as we just come into this position. So we're in a half kneeling position, and then the side at which the knee is down, we then just bring the arm up over the head. And then all this is doing, this arm, is encouraging the thoracic spine to extend, which is encouraging that T12 insertion and diaphragm insertion to extend. So we're getting the length from the arm extension and not so much from the hip extension, because what a lot of people will do is they'll come really far forward, and it's this that's driving the hip forward, or the femur forward in the hip capsule, putting the pressure on the front of the hip capsule. Now, again, this will be dependent on individuals, but there is nothing wrong with just adding a little bit of extension there if you need it, and then coming up, because that's only going to add to a little bit of length through the psoas, which will be helpful. What we can then do to add another piece to that is, which I haven't shown you up on here, which is because it joins onto the side of the vertebra, if we can rotate the vertebra as well as lift the arm, we're going to get a little bit more length through. So all that basically looks like is if I come down into this position, and I'll face the camera this time. So I'm in this position, I lift my arm up, and I rotate the spine. I'll try to keep my hip forward, so I'm not rotating my hip as well, because that defeats the object, because then I'm rotating from the hip and not the spine and not getting the length from the psoas. So I keep my hip forward, and then I turn my chest. And then I come up into this position. You can use this as a little bit of an anchor, and just hold in there and just getting that stretch up through psoas. And what you'll find is the stretch will potentially come from here and move up into here. Now, one thing I always say to people when they are stretching is don't focus too much on the technique. Go for the feel of the stretch. Try and find where you want the stretch. Or if you're finding that the stretch is staying there and you can't get it here, then there's probably not any excessive tightness here. It's probably more here. And if you can remove the tension or the tightness from here, it will probably help with the elongation a bit further up as well. So think about it in that way. Don't worry about me saying psoas, but you can't get it there. It might not be the psoas, it might be something else, but we're finding that out through the stretch that we're doing. Now, another option that you can use, now I'm going to use just this part of the cable. Now, you could use a door or any sort of thing that's high up, but what this will do is this will sort of force you into the position that you need to get into. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put my knee down, just as I've done, put the knee down on the side of the cable machine. Now I'm going to reach up and I'm going to grab up nice and high. So this is just like me as I was before with my arm up in the air. But what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to come an inch off the floor and grab an inch higher. Then I'm going to hold on tight. So I'm now, again, I've got more length going through this area. It may be coming up here, it may be a bit further down here, but I'm not putting that pressure on the front of the capsule. I'm getting the arm up. Again, if I want to put a little bit of extension through the hip, then you can, but not excessive amounts. But I'm just using that to anchor myself to be able to get good height and good length and good extension through that thoracic spine to be able to lengthen that psoas from T12 all the way down. So hopefully this has given you a little bit more in the way of guidance and a little bit more help with regards to how you go about stretching the psoas.